Ex-prisoners of Reddit, who was the most evil person there, and what did they do that was so bad? I was in a women's prison. New inmate told everyone she was in for tax fraud. Couple of days later, she gets the crap beaten out of her and doesn't leave her cell again. Food gets taken in by screws, and eventually she gets ghosted out. Turns out she was in our side and both her husband and son were in the male side for running a CP ring. Those guys had been put straight in the VP wing, but most female prisons don't have enough S-offenders to have one. It was one of the screws who told some of the inmates why she was in. They wanted her to be taught a lesson. The offenses were awful. She was fully part of it and was responsible for acquiring a lot of the victims as she was trusted by people. Youngest victim was her niece's 3-month-old who had to be hospitalized due to trauma. I'm not one to condone violence, but sounds like she deserved that beating. Yeah, I don't think anyone was too upset by it. English guy here. I spent 4.5 months in prison in 2018. There was a guy who was really nice, seemed like a genuine guy. That was until I found out he strangled his drunk wife to death and left her there whilst he went to work the next morning. The killing your wife and going to work like nothing is wrong thing. Years ago, husband trained a guy in his company and the guy forgot their assigned iPad one day. He told him to go home and get it. The guy went home, stepped over his wife's dead body in the kitchen to grab his iPad and returned back to work. About a week later my husband came home and told me what they had found out when the police came in to ask them timeline questions and more right before he was arrested. He killed her before work, was hoping that his alibi would be, I was at work all day on base, I couldn't have done it. He made some critical mistakes. He would have been caught either way, but proof that he went home when her body was already laying there dead was another nail in the coffin for him. I was locked up with Jodi Arias, so that was bizarre. There was also a woman who murdered her baby and kept it in the freezer. We called her Maytac. Jodi Arias was on trial one of the few times I visited the US and we would hear about her every night. Her name stuck with me. It's odd to read it in a thread now. Even odder to physically imagine someone being locked up around her and interacting with you. Anyway, I hope you have a good day. Before I got my prison sentence in 2013, I was in Arapahoe County Jail with James Holmes. Was pretty crazy cause they'd put the whole facility on lockdown to move him, even though he was in segregation. I am 20, was in and out juvie from 15 to 18 till I went to county jail. The worst people I came into contact was a boy 15 who shot his stepmother, slit her throat, beat her head in with a blunt object, wrapped her in sheets for the father's roommate to find her, then he shot him. Happened in McMinnville, Oregon. Other than that, a lot of people essaying siblings, and making threats to shoot up the high schools in the area. That's Yamhill County for you. My dad went to prison for 6 months and there's this one story that struck me the most. A guy was convicted for graping someone. When he was asked who did he grape, he said it was just some escort. Later that day when it was time for visiting, his wife went ballistic on him, screaming at him at the top of her lungs. Turns out he graped his 11-year-old stepdaughter. After the inmates and policemen found that out, they took turns in beating the shit out of him. Turns out none of that was true. His wife was just pissed with him. Go to the Philippines, then say that to me slowly. This rich kid stabbed his friend in the chest, killing him, but he was on various substances and weed at the time and doesn't remember anything of it other than his friend on the floor dying. The mad thing is this guy, 18 years old, actually got off with the murder and found not guilty, although was sent down for just under 2 years for possession of a knife. His parents were quite wealthy and it was a big case in the UK. Basically his barristers were the best money could buy and he said that's how he got off. Edit, he didn't have any remorse for his actions. Which was made to think made him a pretty fucked up person. It's a funny one though, because he actually seemed a nice guy until he would talk about the killing and just didn't care what he had done. Nobody else in the prison had ever killed anyone to my knowledge, as it was a lower cat prison, but he was only there for possession of a knife. When I was in the outbox the day before I was released, I was hanging out with a bunch of guys just killing time. One of them was part of a moody killing gang. They kidnapped and killed a bunch of people for body parts. And cut them off while the people were alive. It was a pretty gruesome case. Anyways, he was really quiet and rather stupid. Just a simple farm boy type. Edit, article about it. Why did they want the body parts? Probably organs trafficking, I would say. When I was in jail, my cellie was a guy that tied his old lady down to their table and tried to carve "do not resuscitate" into her chest. Halfway through, the cops showed up because the neighbors could hear her screaming. I tried as politely as I could to tell the captain that I don't mess around with woman beaters and asked for a block transfer. Thankfully they put me in work release, which was awesome because I got to work in the kitchen and deliver food to the different blocks. No food hall meals were brought to you and you never left your block except to go to the basketball CT or the library. Well, one day I'm serving food to one of the solitary cells and as soon as the slot is open a drenching wet magazine gets thrown out. Turns out it's covered in piss and the woman inside is the chick my previous cellie carved up. Turns out she stabbed her son with a syringe of her blood and she was inside too. Some crazy stories all around, but that couple far and away were the craziest people I saw. Not sure about most evil but interesting story. When I did time I was bunked up with a guy who had stabbed his uncle to death, molested him. Guy was insanely mean, but when lockup came, he was super nice to me. He was 23 but couldn't read or write, so we would dictate letters to his girlfriend and I would write them for him. When my dad went to jail he was shocked by how many young men couldn't read or write. He made a lot of important friends because he was one of the few people able to help with legal paperwork. Edit. For those interested, in Ontario prisons, 65% of the population have less than a grade 8 education or are functionally illiterate. 79% do not have their high school diploma or GED. Not in prison, but I was an intern in a public defender's office over 10 years ago, and the one that stands out was a juvenile locked up for the third time for raping kids aged 2 to 4. Kid was obese and clearly very damaged. This was a juvenile detention center that was often used as a babysitter by crackhead moms, accuse the kid of a crime and get them locked up for the weekend so they could go on a bender. He was serving a sentence. I was warned going in there that he could turn violent at the drop of a hat, and the attorney was nervous about bringing a young female in, but I insisted. Kid looks me straight in the eye and says, "Don't let me out, I will do it again." I can't stop. He was hunched over, dead eyes and completely serious. I was 16 but tried as an adult, so they kept me in a 21 and under pod. Malvo, the DC sniper, was in my pod. Also, one of the first people I saw in a chain gang was Charles Manson's brother. Swastika on his forehead and everything. Lesson learned, don't be a F-boy. F-boy? What did you do related to that got you tried as an adult? Technically armed robbery with a deadly weapon. But in reality it was me and 4 other friends who held up a store one of us worked at with a plastic gun. Still ridiculously stupid, and I deserve everything that came from it, but it really was the life-altering event I needed. Didn't help that Jay Leno and David Letterman made fun of us on their shows either. Lol. I was in JDC, not DOC, but most of the people in JDC were locked up for the same reason as some people would be in DOC. I remember talking to this kid and he was kind of stupid in the head. I asked him what he did and he raped his 10-year-old sister while she was asleep. Most of them were in there for murder, but he stood out since he was a S offender. I worked with a lot of juvenile S offenders over the years. Normally the best behaved out of the bunch, and when it would happen upon their convictions it would always surprise me at how heinous some of their S crimes were compared to how subdued and or polite they were when I knew them. The sad fact is that the overwhelming majority were in there for perpetrating the same abuse that they were simultaneously a victim to as well. Sad to see the circle of abuse and how it perpetuates itself. Was in prison for 27 months. Unfortunately, your child rapists and CP guys were mixed into Gen Pop, so you would get all kinds like that everywhere. The worst one I heard of was when I was in military prison. Details are foggy because this was 13 years ago, but I remember there being a guy who got 99 years for murder. He had killed a guy, then killed the guy's wife because she was home and would have been a witness, but not before raping her first. The whole facility got locked down every time they moved this guy, because they didn't even want the other inmates to see what he looked like. There was a correctional officer at least 6 feet 5 inches and well built, and he would always come in pissed off. So one morning we are waiting in line for breakfast and he thought he heard this older man call him a bitch. He followed the man back to his cell and started teeing off on him. The man didn't even try fighting back, and when he fell the first time he split his head open on the steel bunk. The inmate was so out of it he started asking where his car keys and wallet went while he was on the ground bleeding. The CO hears the man and for some reason turns around and goes back and hits him a few more times and says, "Who's the B now?" I'll never forget thinking, damn, this is somebody's father. Was in Spofford Juvenile Detention Center when I was 13, not a good age to be there at 4'9" plus 100 pounds, and I was one of 2 Caucasians in the entire place, so I mostly kept to myself. I did befriend a kid named Chris Whitehead who showed up with a freshly healed scar about 15 to 20 inches long in the shape of a C on the side of his head. He didn't talk much, but he ended up telling me how it happened when I finally got the nerve to ask him. told me his older brother jumped him into the crypts, and since he cried during, he took a hot knife and burned it into his head for the disrespect. Then he had his little brother, the same age as me by the way, shoot the first person to cross the street in their neighborhood, who ended up being a young pregnant girl. How he only ended up at Spofford is beyond me, but it was disgusting to see such a nice kid end up there because of his older piece of shit brother. I remember when he went to court he was sure he'd be transferred, so he pissed all over his jumpsuit and stuffed it in the radiator, causing all of us in the semi-violent block to be moved upstairs with the actual violent criminals. I think the kid I'm referring to was only on mine because of his age. The staff members there gave everyone their permission to beat the living shit out of him when he came back, but he never did because he got transferred, thankfully, because his brother ended up there too and was fully on board with the beatdown his brother was going to receive. Really glad they shut down the place because they were running drugs and S-ring on the female side, and the treatment of the kids there was disgusting to say the least. I wasn't an inmate, I was an officer, so my opinion might be disqualified. But at a facility I worked at we were a level 5, which is maximum security. Lots of people who had life without parole, and just a bunch of different things happened. One guy was on a documentary because he traveled across several states and killed around 5 people total. He was pissed cause the documentary blamed him, but he always tried to say his father hitting him as a child made him kill these people. Then there's the old guy who raped his young grandchildren and was furious that he was sent to prison cause they were his grandkids so he could do whatever he wanted. He had also raped his children when they were growing up. Lots of sick things in a max security prison, and those would be nothing when compared to a federal supermax. I went to county jail. It was an eye-opening experience. The inmates were generally pretty decent. Most were just there because of a moment of stupidity. Others were there because they suffered from mental health issues. The evil people were the COs. Their behavior was horrific and disgusting. Jail is designed to strip your humanity, and COs are the enforcers of this paradigm. And y'all should keep in mind, jail and prison are not quite the same. Jail sucks more when it comes to the staff, because often they're poorly staffed and many of the inmates are probably just there for stupid misdemeanors and couldn't bail out, might not even be guilty, and yeah, the COs are power-tripping yokels, depending on the jurisdiction. Prison? Different ballgame. You can be locked in with some hard fuckers. It's actually better than jail in most cases, since there's more shit to do, but as long as you stay out of gangs and keep to yourself more or less, you probably will be okay. Usually run a bit more professionally. Bottom line, try not to get locked up, folks. Do what you gotta do, don't hurt anyone, but incarceration sucks. Do not recommend. Hands down. So this lady was married. Husband cheated. Had a full-blown affair, ended up with a love child. Somewhere along the line the wife is babysitting the husband's illegitimate child. He comes home from work, sitting down to eat dinner, and asks her how is the baby. She says, I don't know. You tell me? This bitch ended up killing the baby, cooking it, putting it in the food and fed it to him. She's doing 2 life sentences. This is in Arizona, by the way. Side note, she looks like the devil, her eyes are literally black and she looks like she has no soul. It takes a lot to creep me out, but this lady's vibe is definitely one of the darkest things I've ever felt in my entire life. I've never been to prison/jail, but I got my ex locked up for a bit for assaulting me, and because he was from out of state, had to sit his happy ass in county for 90 days due to being a flight risk. For context, he shoved me so hard, I flipped over the back of a couch into a table, shoved me into a door bruising my back on the doorknob, then slammed my face up against a mirror so hard it gave me a nosebleed that wouldn't stop. He told me later, because of course I talked to him again, right, what a fucking catch, that he thought he was in there for nothing. There were dudes on the same floor in there for beating their girls bloody with pipes and already talking about how bad they were gonna beat them when they got out, how I should consider myself lucky cause those girls are gonna die when those guys get out. P.S. Don't worry y'all. I'm alive, married to an actual saint and living my best life, and haven't heard from this dude in almost 9 years. A woman I was acquainted with in the facility I was in allegedly microwaved her child. Another woman killed her parents. A good friend of mine was forced, by her husband, to dispose of her sister's body after her husband had raped and murdered her. You don't ask, why are you here? They'll tell you if they want you to know. There was also this dude in his 40s, this was when I was at the county jail, before being shipped off to state prison, who was a janitor at an elementary school. He was weird with a giant Star of David tattoo on his back and blonde highlights in his longish bowl-cut black hair. He sodomized 2 girls, 9 and 11, with a broom handle. I think his charge was sodomy with a foreign object. I remember everyone feeling contempt because we knew that in that county, offenders got off easy. Fortunately, we were wrong, he was given life. I remember the paper he got from court read release date, deceased. There was another chamo who raped his 3-year-old daughter, and when his wife caught him, she freaked out and called the police. He ran from the cops in a car and drove off a cliffside. Whether that was on purpose or not I'm not sure, but here is where it gets worse. So after the accident, he couldn't talk or act normal. He was essentially mentally handicapped, would shuffle around and rock back and forth anytime someone talked to him. Brain damage is what people said, from the car crash. People were nice to him until they found out his charge, then ignored him or were cold towards him, but he was restarted at this point, so no one went out of their way to harm him. This went on for maybe 7 or 8 months, but people started to say he was full of shit because gradually he started acting more normal, or people would catch him acting more normal than they believe he tried to portray himself. Eventually, it became obvious. He could not keep up the charade any longer and everyone knew he was faking it. People started messing with him and tormenting him, people pissing on his laundry bag, trustees banging their brooms on the side of his cell wall to make him start going crazy and crying. He had a single cell in the corner. He was still trying to act like he was restarted but was slipping up and slacking at times, and it became obvious he was full of shit. The worst part is that he only got 4 years. 4 fucking years for raping his daughter. I got 6 years for robbing someone of their drugs. Anyways, when he got to state prison after being shipped from the county jail, he got beat real bad. Word travels in the system. I think he spent the remainder of his time in isolation. Even the guards hated him. Heard a story that some inmates would put broken glass in their feces and throw it at CO's faces. So when they would wipe the stuff away from their eyes, the glass cuts them. Yep, they mix it with all sort of stuff as well so as to make it a fine mist. Often it will be allowed to ferment for an extended period of time to make it as putrid as possible. It's called gassing, and it's became such a problem in American prisons that they made it a felony. I was incarcerated with over 280 people doing life without parole. There were all kinds: stabbed the neighbor lady 150 plus times, shot a bully in the head in the school parking lot, beat a dude with a hammer, etc. There were 2 that stuck with me though. One where he looked me right in the eye and told me about shooting a guy with a shotgun to the chest, creeped me the F out. Weirdo that kidnapped and killed some girl in his basement was another. John Wayne Gacy actually designed the miniature golf course there. The prisoners have a mini golf course. They did. I have no idea as to if they still do. There are all kinds of shit to do in some prisons. My mom was locked up with Selena's murderer. And we all know what she did. Every Mexican woman wanted to kill her, so they kept her away from everyone. Damn Yolanda. So your mom never met her? Nope. She never spoke to her. But I remember as a kid visiting my mom and she whispered for me to look over at the other side of the room. And there that puta was. Looking just like the actress in the movie. My mom said she never spoke to anyone besides her attorney. I mean, I guess the death threats were crazy. Especially from some woman who bit her husband's penis off. I've not been in jail, so don't know if this will count. Please delete if not allowed. But when I was 19 I was a prison visitor. The one guy I visited was in jail for theft. He'd pick up high-value items and just walk out of a store, think 10,000 pounds electronics from Harrods, and did it repeatedly. I asked him why he did it so much, as he was not much older than me and had been in and out of jail since he was about 15. His answer: he was attracted to young children and wanted to make sure he could never act on those feelings. His doctor told him, he told me, anyway, that it wasn't an issue because my friend told his doctor he would never act on those feelings and never got him any help he'd asked for. Now, I can guess what a lot of you are thinking. Yeah, right. But he told me about his own childhood, and every word was verified later on. Both his parents had been essaying him for as long as he could remember, passed him around their disgusting friends to use as they wanted along with other children at parties, etc. Just over a year of visiting him and he hung himself, because he was going to be released and didn't want to be outside in case he did abuse some other child, and left a message saying he wanted to be sure he'd never hurt anyone the way he was. I miss him still and was proud of him, and to call him my friend. The CP guy. He was seemingly normal, which I assumed meant it was drugs or something. That's why I was there. I became friends through playing chess with him, and he was pretty socially skilled and intelligent. One day I realized that I hadn't asked him what his charges were, and he said he was in a chat room and accidentally clicked on a link that downloaded one picture of a little girl, and said his IP got traced and he got 5 years for it. I had someone on the outside look him up, and he not only had over 100 counts of possession of CP, but multiple counts of distribution and manufacturing of CP. After confronting him about it, he denied it and I separated from him completely. Side note: other people found out and fucked him up? I really thought about it but didn't want to add time to my sentence. Now, I've made some mistakes in my life with drugs and stealing, but CP or anything to do with children or taking advantage of them disgusts me to my core. Not only is what he did evil, thinking about how socially normal he seemed at first still makes me squirm today. Fuck that guy and anyone who does what he does. I slept next to a dude that brutally murdered a 3-year-old boy. Beat the child to death. Matthew Moat was the boy's name. Don't Google it if you want to sleep tonight. I was taught to play cards by a man that killed 2 women in a robbery with his wife as the co-defendant. His name was Martin Woolley. I went to classes with a guy that murdered 2 people execution style at 16. He was in his 40s when I met him and I thought it had mellowed. He'd murdered 2 other people inside and beaten both cases, talked about it at dinner like it was nothing. He seemed pretty evil. I only knew him as Big Shorty. I saw 2 guys hold a younger dude in his 20s hand in a steel door and then slammed it, broke the bones in the back of his hand, the carpals I believe. He screamed and melted to the floor. One of the guys holding him kicked him while he lay crying in the floor. He seemed pretty evil. One of them was Rooster maybe? Oh fuck it. Isn't that enough? Do I win something for living through the presence of this evil? I know what it looks like now. I mean, people say, he's evil, and I look at him and go, no, that's just a run-of-the-mill asshole. There are many of those. Evil, real evil is harder to come by and I pray you know it when it's close.